Hi guys, welcome back. Today I want to talk about a fundamental mistake that I made very early in my case. My case turned out okay. I won my failure to accommodate claim against my boss, but I think I could have done even better with a different strategy. So I wanted to talk about it today in the interest of trying to help you guys avoid the trap that I fell into. Now, those of you who have heard my whole story know that failure to accommodate wasn't my only claim and my boss wasn't my only perpetrator. There was the diversity manager who tried to have me put on a PIP to make it easier for my boss to fire me, the HR henchman who helped my boss document non-existent problems with my performance and conduct, again to make it easier for my boss to fire me, my second-tier supervisor / anti-harassment officer for our installation who knew 100% what my boss was doing, but did none of the things that our policy said she was supposed to do to stop it, and a few others. I documented what all those people did and passed that evidence along to my investigator and my attorney. But I never amended my EEOC complaint to call them out by name, and I never added new claims as they did more stuff. From the very beginning of my process, from the informal stage all the way through, I stayed laser focused on my boss's illegal actions and getting reasonable accommodation because that's what I really wanted. I also had several other reasons to keep the scope of my complaint narrow. Physically, I was sick and too low energy to even think about fighting a bunch of powerful managers all at once. My health was my number one priority. And strategically, I wasn't even trying to win a lawsuit against NASA back then. I never really thought it would come to that. After all, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that what my boss did by refusing to accommodate me for my IBS-D was disgusting, degrading, and dangerous. I figured NASA, being a science agency and all, would figure that out eventually. Then they'd accommodate me, I'd drop my case, and we'd all live happily ever after. I thought the more officials that I dragged into the middle of my complaint, the less likely that was to happen. So I made a conscious choice to focus on the one person who started it all and could have ended it if she wanted to, my boss. And I stayed focused on her all the way through my process. That was my big mistake. And there's one thing in particular that I realize about the EEOC process now that I didn't back then. When we're filing an EEOC complaint, it's against our employer, not just against our perpetrators. So the minute I filed my complaint with EEOC, the whole agency stood accused. After that, nobody at NASA was ever going to help me. But I didn't realize that at the time. Knowing that's how it works now, I can see that before I filed my EEOC complaint, I should have reconsidered the scope of my case and my decision to focus on my boss. And I kind of thought about it, but I was worried that if I broadened the scope of my complaint too much, it was just going to make the retaliation worse, and also I was still pretty sick. So I kept the scope narrow. Would I make that same decision today? Probably not. For starters, keeping the scope narrow let some of my worst perpetrators off the hook entirely. A couple even avoided having to testify at my hearing, even though I'd named them in my affidavit, and the evidence about what they did was in my report of investigation. At my hearing, my AJ noticed that, and to his credit, he did ask NASA, hey, do these people still work here? And they did, but NASA didn't want them to testify, so they made up excuses. And I didn't fight to make him testify because at the time I really didn't want him to testify either. My attorney and I didn't want to be surprised by a bunch of new lies in the middle of my hearing. But looking back, I wish I'd dragged every last one of them right into the middle of it. And I could have done that just by amending my complaint every time they did something new and illegal. If I'd done that, I think my retaliation and hostile workplace claims would have gone differently. But since my case was mostly focused on my boss, that's where my AJ put his focus too. And his decision said that he believed my boss was genuinely concerned about my attendance, whether or not she had legitimate cause to be. And he said that's why she seemingly retaliated. I don't believe for 1 minute that my boss was genuinely concerned about my attendance. And I think my AJ might have agreed with me on that if I'd shown him the whole picture of what NASA did. Even if my boss had been able to maintain her mask of genuine concern, what about the others who retaliated and contributed to a hostile work environment? Did they have discriminatory intent, or were they concerned too? Was HR concerned? Because they could have checked the timekeeping data to see if there was cause for concern. Or at the very least, they could have checked to see if my boss had actually documented any of her concerns before I requested reasonable accommodation. And what about the diversity office? Were they concerned too? Because why? I didn't work for them. Now, of course, scoping our claims the right way is a bit of a balancing act, and overscoping them isn't a great idea either. If we complain about every little thing, we risk making ourselves look like a big old crybaby, and that's not great for our credibility. And of course, we have to be careful not to make our complaints so broad that we spread ourselves and our attorneys thin trying to prove them. And amending our claims can cause other problems, so we really want to think it through. I'll put some basic information on how to amend our claims in the description so you can see what's involved for yourself. After reading that information and hearing what I have to say today, if you have any questions about the scope of your complaint, it's a really good idea to talk that over with a good employment attorney. They know how to scope a complaint to win. I don't love admitting that I made a mistake this big. I don't kick myself over it because, like I said, I won and I'm okay with the outcome. But I could have done better. And I hope by sharing this with you guys today, maybe I can help some of you do it better. I'll see you in the next one. Till then, take care and hang in.